Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective, a show in which we try to showcase countercultural, counter-political narratives and those who are brave enough to still speak up in a time when often what we find is cancel culture and censorship seems to be the norm, especially across mainstream media. Today, we're going to be tackling the issue of the British economy, but in the context of the wider global reality. Economics is a subject which is quite often really a dark zone for most people. It's crazy really to think that most of our lives are dictated by money in one way or another, yet our level of economic literacy is literally negligible in many cases. This is what perhaps arguably gives the opportunity for establishment and the big corporations and those who do know about economy the opportunity to hoodwink us, delude us, and not least of all governments. Well, we're in the context of Britain, of course, Keir Starmer has come in promising a complete sea change, and we're well into his term of office, yet people are complaining that nothing is being done. Is Starmer rudderless? Do they have a direction? Is there going to be a change from whatever went on before in terms of neoliberal economics? Well, with me in the studio, I have Shabir Rizvi, an economic and political analyst of some repute across many channels. Thank you very much for coming in, Shabir.
Thank you very much, Brother Mohsen. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. And this basically, you've watched the collapse of British economy over the last 20, 30 years and have been predicting it. A lot of our colleagues, Professor Rodney Shakespeare, who's an erudite professor of economics himself, spoke about the recession that was on the way, the global collapse. He was talking about de-dollarization long before all of these things happened. We've known that. But give me your overview of the British political reality. I mean, for me, the public wants to know about two or three things, that's all. They want to know about why austerity seems to be never-ending. They want to know why it is that the health system is collapsing, and they want to know why immigration is, to their minds, flooding the nation and making us more and more economically impoverished. This is the narrative that seems to have set itself, and this is swinging British politics and perhaps European politics and American politics at the moment. Your analysis?
Well, look, I think it's a very complex issue that you've raised, and there are many sort of angles for us to have this conversation. I'll try to unpick the 3 points that you raise. Firstly, we've got to look at it in recent history and perhaps also more historical context of where Britain was and where Britain is now, if you like. Perhaps if we can start the story soon after the Second World War, when the first Labour government came into power. Churchill was the Prime Minister at that time, the War Prime Minister, whom everyone thought would have a thumping victory, but he actually didn't win. It was the Labour Party that came into power. Labour Party ruled Britain for 6 years, and they set in the welfare state, all the welfare provision, National Health Service, pension provisions. Well, pension provisions started a bit earlier during Lloyd George's period, but progressively it became significant. Then free university education, welfare for the children. And you've got to remember that soon after the war, there was, one talks about austerity measures which were applied by the Conservative government after the financial crisis 14 years ago, is that there was huge austerity because obviously the whole of Europe was devastated, going through a 6-year war in Europe, which killed by any estimate up to 100 million people just in Europe. Many families, many orphans, many widows, and the decimation of the industrial sector. So what I normally like to call is that the welfare state or the welfare provisions, not just in Europe, but also in Europe and to a degree in USA, came about not because the elite were altruistic. they didn't have a fear of God in their heart. They knew that if some crumbs of welfare were not given to the ordinary people, their castles and mansions could be sort of the next target. Mm-hmm. So it was a good way of trying to quieten, to give something to the working people.
Okay.
So you had a growth period soon after the war, the 50s and the early 60s, and it continued. So, of course, then immigration, of course, was at a very high scale. If you look at, just before coming, you said that you were going to talk about, I was looking at the Office of National Statistics figures. If you look at each year from 1960 to 70, nearly 60 to 70,000 immigrants were coming in every year. Mm-hmm. That's a huge number when you think about it, that so many immigrants were allowed, whether from the Caribbean or from the subcontinent, from India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, perhaps to a degree. And that obviously provided the labour for continuation of the British economy to a level which was sustainable. Because when immigrants go into any country, especially in Europe or USA and UK, they're younger population. They're a generation in their 20s and 30s, so they've got at least 30 to 40 years of working life. They will earn a salary, they will contribute through taxes. So it's really an extraordinary input that the immigrants did bring to the UK economy in particular. And you've got to remember also at that time that the British Empire was being whittled away slowly and slowly. India, Pakistan became independent in 1948 or 47, which obviously lost huge supply of resources and also the pillage that Britain was committing in the subcontinent. And the fact shows that, India, before the British came, used to contribute 25% of the GDP, global GDP. And when Britain left the subcontinent, India was contributing only 3% of the GDP. So the amount of wealth that Britain was able to steal just from India was enormous.
Well, let me hold you there, because you've mentioned the immigration issue, and you've raised the economy issue. Before we go on to health as well, I'd like to backtrack a little on the economics, and you're setting the scene historically, and I'm sure you'll probably develop that further. But the economics of post-empire, post-imperial Britain, and the economics of today are not the same. Of course, now we're in a period, I say really almost post-neoliberal. There's something else emerging, because what's going on with Donald Trump and the threats of tariffs and the extraordinary moves that he's willing to threaten, and the America First policy is not something which isn't going to affect actually his erstwhile or even present partners. So the economics of that time was very much about labour. I get that. And the Queen even gave a call to the Commonwealth to come and serve Britain. Something which the far right today is certainly not going to be mentioning. The rise of the Reform Party, arguably, is very much on this issue of immigration. And they're continuing to whip up that support to the point where we have Nigel Farage leading the polls for the first time. Just this week or recently, we've got the sceptre of a three-party race, genuinely. Now, that is done on the back of a fear that is definitely there. And I think that fear is 100% around the 3 points that I've raised. And it seems that Nigel Farage is the one who's cashing in on it best. So Mr. Farage isn't going to be telling people about the history of why we're in the economic or health or as it were, the immigration crisis as it's been painted. And the other point I want to raise here is immigration. Always, there's been more people emigrating from Britain than immigrating, but that never gets raised. Nobody raises the issue that actually the population is dwindling because we're in a depopulation. We're in negative population, and we aren't even in a surplus in terms of number of immigrants coming in, people emigrating. So that raises the question of, is this a racist agenda as well? Is there a racism link to this? And is that what these right wing, or, far right organisations are actually preying on. And is that where British politics is going?
Well, there is certainly, without doubt, a racist agenda to it. We can see sort of the right-wing party in Germany potentially is likely to get 20% vote this year. And you've got Meloni in Italy, and then you've got Le Pen in France. So whole across Europe, and also Wilders in Holland. So one can see that right-wing movement taking shape in mainland Europe, and certainly through Farage and his associates in the UK. But what I think, when we talk about politics and economics, one looks at somehow consciously or subconsciously the previous 12 months or previous a year or 2 years. But one's got to really understand the historical context to fully understand what's going on today. And therefore, it's very important to analyze what happened to Britain in the historical context. And if I may just labor on a little bit.
No, please do. I wanted to contextualize it, that there is a link, but exactly, I want you to expand on that. Go.
Look, you grew up in this country. I grew up here. We were very young when we came. And if you remember, we used to have a bottle of milk every day at the school. The reason was that families did not have sufficient funds to give their children milk. This is in a country which had a super empire. And soon after the war, and continues up to the 60s and the 70s, then Margaret Thatcher came, and she became famously known as the Thatcher, the milk snatcher, if you like, when the bottle of milk was dispensed with. So that again shows an aspect of the British economy that the people did not have sufficient money to be able to provide milk for their children on a daily basis. That's one point to remember. Secondly, soon after the Second World War and during that period, children in London used to go to school without shoes up and down the country. And I'm sure you also remember the Jarrow marchers coming from northern parts of UK, marching all the way to London, demanding better income and better salaries and so on, and better provision. Plus also you had a massacre of a demonstration in the late 19th century in Clapham Common when there were demonstrations. So if you look at these historical things that the British government has inflicted brutality on its own people historically, not just in the colonial nations. And that is important to understand, I think, and that needs to be articulated, that the British elite have always tried to suppress people demanding their rights. And Margaret Thatcher, as I said, milk snatcher sort of labeled to her, and also destroying the whole mining industry.
Palm tax, mining industries, allowing neoliberal banking to come in and take over the economy. Yeah.
Exactly. So we go back to 40 years, 45 years, when famously, the American president was Reagan at that time, and it was known as Reaganomics, if you like. And Margaret Thatcher followed that from the Friedman, Professor Friedman of Chicago University. I don't want to get into that, perhaps some other program we'll talk about. But really what is important to understand is that someone famously coined that it's not immigrants who come and take your jobs. It's really people coming in private jets who take your jobs, because it's the big, super rich organizations who take over other business corporations, and they cut jobs, they cut salaries, and really try to what they call euphemistically rationalize an organization. And what rationalization means is that if you have 100,000 people working, perhaps get rid of 50,000, so that the bottom line, the stakeholders, and mainly it's the shareholders who benefit from it, not the workers, because the workers lose their jobs, they lose their benefits, they may be given new contracts where their pension provisions may not be as adequate as they were previously. So a whole host of things that the elite coming in private jets, landing in the UK.
Well, just on that point, I didn't list that as one of my top 3 issues that's concerning the public. So the fact that you're saying that the elites, the money men, the money lenders, those in corporate power, those who don't get taxed adequately, and not only that, don't seem to really contribute to the economies either, because there was one statistic that I come across which said that Tesco's, for instance, just an example, so the lay people can get it. Tesco's in a locality like Watford, where I grew up, 65 to 70% of its money that it generates in that town leaves the town. It doesn't prosper or benefit the local community. Compared to a small businessman, the local shopkeeper, as it used to be, virtually all of his business finance would in some way be reinvested in his local patch. Just there in itself, the impact of the favoritism that has been shown to corporate transnational corporations, bankers, etc., by Thatcher onwards, Tony Blair, none of them have in any way reined in that fraternity. Jeremy Corbyn hinted at the fact that he might do it, and he was absolutely destroyed. But that brings in the question of the way the media plays a role in manipulating people's thoughts around economy and whatnot. And they're at it again, I think. I think with, personally, that Nigel Farage and the push of the Reform Party is a sponsored, engineered process, one in which the establishment media, owned by the corporation, surprise, surprise, Barclays Brothers and Rupert Murdoch, all investing in that narrative to make sure the man who will do the job for them comes in again. And arguably Donald Trump was the same. It's the same case in point. Yet Trump and Farage would also say, we are anti-establishment. We're bringing the establishment down. Whereas many would argue, actually, they're just controlled opposition, changing the game. What's your thought about the way the media plays a role in manipulating people's thoughts and ideas around these kinds of major issues?
Well, of course, media, without doubt, plays a huge part. That's why we are saying, very clearly over the last year and a half, 2 years, especially during the Gaza situation that developed, that people have withdrawn from taking information from the mainstream media. So therefore they will listen to your programs or other sort of outlets like this to get real information. They have no faith in your mainstream media or legacy media, as one may like to call. So that's one important issue, because obviously who controls the narrative controls the decisions, if you like. And that is a key factor. And it has always been the case, Brother Mohsin, that, one talks about now that it's happening. But this, words of mass deception, if you like, have been continuous historically. If you look at it again in the historical context, when the First World War, Second World War, BBC was the mouthpiece of the state, if you like. It has continued that role till now, 2025. And what's interesting is that the interlinking of the elites is fascinating also, particularly in the UK. We talk about egalitarian society in UK, but it's not egalitarian as you know it, and I know it, that if you go to Oxbridge, you will end up with a good job in the city, or get a job in the BBC, or in the media, some kind of, and therefore if you were studying at the same sort of institute, these elite institutes, then you will be successful. And therefore a friend who was in the class may be running Goldman Sachs. Another one might be sort of head of BBC.
So jobs for the boys is still around.
Absolutely. It has been, and it continues to be. And the other thing, especially in UK, is fascinating, is that someone who's got an accent like Rees Moggs or someone else's, no matter how stupid thing he says, because he's got a posh accent, people will accept it. If someone's got a sort of accent from Billericay or Tyne Tees, no matter how important things that they would be saying would be seen as, and there's been a lot of research on
there's
this
a
matter.
statistical reality
exactly.
that even the program we're watching,
Yes.
70% of what's going to be influencing people right now will be how I look or how you look.
Yes.
25% may be the way we sound and the tone to our voice. This is a public relations reality. And 5% will be the content. So the most that people will remember from this conversation, shockingly, will be probably 5% of what the time they spent. That makes people very vulnerable to manipulation by, again, the same thing we said. If there were policy agendas, if there was an underlying direction or trajectory, and I'm going to put it on the table now, because there are very powerful forces as lobby groups. We've had a lot of exposure of, for instance, the Israel lobby groups, and there were Jazeera documentaries showing how people went and influenced politicians. We know also that these powerful lobby groups have strong connections in the City of London, for instance, so the Corporation of London and its interests, the interests of these other foreign nations, the interests of other corporate businesses, and the fact that politicians in this country also end up on the boards of a lot of these companies, and then the media being controlled by, again, the same companies. Isn't it time that people really woke up to the fact that they actually could well be being subjected to essentially propaganda and engineering of what direction they should be thinking and what the policies should be? Is it time that we went beyond even party politics as we know it, if those party politicians and those systems are also locked into exactly the same mechanism?
Well, the situation with party politics is that, whether it's in the USA or here, one may talk about Trump and Farage, like you were saying, that they claim to be challenging the establishment, or when Trump said that, he wants to clear the swamp, but he was the biggest alligator in that swamp, if you like. Yeah. So to be able to get rid of that, it's not sort of something that is really on the agenda. It's really a nice way of appeasing the general public that I'm going to be fighting your corner. But in effect, these leaders don't do that. They are very clearly interested in their own self-preservation and supporting their elite. So the point that you were making of, people remember only 5% of the contents or whatever we say. But in UK, it's particularly fascinating is that it's the accent which matters. So if you speak with estuary English, it will resonate more with the people. If someone has sort of, provincial accents from different parts of the UK, no matter how important thing, and this is statistically proven to be the case, particularly in the UK, which is interesting when you think about it, So that also has an impact.
So it's a class thing.
Absolutely.
That's part of the class divide.
Yes.
And the class divide is like Eton, it's Oxbridge.
Yes.
That enhances and maintains it, but it's also then to do with private education and the split between private education and the public sector and the standards there. So essentially, the picture you're painting is of a very unequal Britain, for sure, but coming specifically to the way then that inequality manifests itself. Of course, Starmer said that he would cut down that inequality. Their whole mantra is based around equality. He would have said that he was going to save the health service, the NHS. He would have promised that he was going to sort out immigration as well. And he would have said that he was going to fix the economy. There would be growth. I want to focus in on all these promises they make and how they are actually failing and why they're failing and what would be the alternative, what would actually work, because it seems like there's been no difference in Britain in the last, in the time that Labour's been in power. Absolutely no difference from what it was in the Tories, and there doesn't seem to be any intention of making it any different. For instance, they're not proposing any wealth creation that I can see. They don't seem to have any change in terms of the privatisation of the NHS. If you're going to keep on privatising the NHS, it's clear that the money is going to be going to middlemen management companies and not to the doctors and the staff and the actual service of the patients. It's clear also that with immigration, they're making almost like classic blunder. People are hugely frustrated because they've got the perception that it's the immigrants who are taking their jobs and causing this trouble. Why? Probably because European plumbers and builders came in, undercut a lot of the British workers, and that on the grassroots has had a real effect. People actually feel the effects of a reduced income. So all of these things, there's no change in them. So why is there no change? Why is this government not going to not really making any changes?
Well, you've had no change since Margaret Thatcher, if you like. Blair was, if you like, Mark II Margaret Thatcher, and Margaret Thatcher was very proud of Blair, as you well may recall. Then you had 14 years of the Tory government, which was continuous. You had Margaret Thatcher and then another British Prime Minister, and then it continued. And then Starmer is really a version, or as George Galloway says, that he's not as charming a version of Blair. At least Blair had some kind of a charm to him, while Starmer is as wood as a tree, if you like, in his sort of approach and articulation of the fact. Leaving that aside, the continuation of decimation of British industry over the last 45 years has left us in the UK with service industries. Financial services, coffee shops, restaurants, tourism, hotels, that kind of. So Britain has really slipped hugely in the league of a manufacturing nation, and you can't sustain. And there was a recent sort of paper published saying that if you take out the southeast of UK from the British economy, the whole of the UK would be like one of the third world countries as far as the economy is concerned. So the focus and the concentration of wealth in the UK, and one talks about the north-south divide, is very much there. Birmingham, for instance, at this moment, second largest city in the UK, the municipality is bankrupt there. I think rubbish is not being collected in Birmingham for the last many months. So you can see that Southeast and London is the focus, and I'm in financial services sector myself, as you know, and the banking, the insurance sector, and the sort of futures market and currency transactions, that contributes huge 15% to the British economy and employs over 1 million people just in London and Southeast. So you can see how much skewed it is in that direction. So until you create employment through manufacturing, through other industries, and Britain, or at least under Starmer, they've been talking about growth, as you said. But the reality is that growth is not going to come about if you still focus on just the service industry. And of course, as we know, the winter fuel allowance that was taken away of £300 for ordinary people, whilst they're talking about bringing back the so-called 1,000 or so multi-millionaires who left in the UK to make it easier for them to live in the UK, whereby pay less taxes, get all the benefits of the UK, because the infrastructure, the roads, the transport, the underground, airports, these are all funded by the taxpayer, if you like, in one way or another, whether it's through privatized companies who come with a begging bowl to the state to support them, like we know with the water industry in the UK, which is privatized but almost bankrupt, and Thames Water itself is now sort of trying to bail itself out by getting more support. So, as an economist, I have never understood this mantra that if you privatize, efficiency comes in. It's just complete loony economics. How is it possible that you privatize, let's say, the ambulance service, and all of a sudden the ambulance service in UK will become efficient? How is that possible? Because, of course, shareholders would have to be paid money from there. Other stakeholders would have, management structure has to be paid. If it's under the auspices of the state as part of the National Health Service, okay, there may be problems and challenges and so on, but it will function a lot better, because all of a sudden, as we know, in the National Health Service, nurses, doctors come through private agencies. Private agencies may pay a nurse, I don't know, let's say £20 an hour, whilst they would be charging £30 an hour to the National Health Service. So that £10 could have been reallocated back into the National Health Service. The reason is that our health minister now, currently, Mr. Streeting, is very much in bed with the American insurance companies and private health sector. So slowly, the National Health Service, which Mr. Starmer and also the Conservative leaders have talked about as a beacon of British healthcare, which in fact it is, Brother Mohsin, that UK's National Health Service costs only 8% of the GDP, while the American healthcare costs 18%. So it's the cheapest way of providing healthcare across the board in the whole of the UK at the requirement of the patient. Because, as you know, in America, if you don't have insurance, then even the well-off middle-class families go bankrupt.
But what I can't understand, if somebody raised this issue, say, look, these politicians who come into power, it's the only profession in this country which doesn't require a qualification. You don't need a degree in managing country or management or political management or economic management. I mean, most of these politicians have no idea about economics. They have very little idea about foreign policy. It's almost like they're going in and learning on the job and with absolutely zero training. I mean, that seems to me to be preposterous. And of course, they're going to rely on the civil service, which is always there. And the civil service, one has to question where their wisdom and influence come from. How much of a hold has the corporate sector got even within our civil service? So there's people in the Treasury, for instance, and their links, of course, Bank of England, and then the Bank of England's links to the corporate. It seems a very cosy arrangement where, again, government could be compromised by their incentives or their private links to big business, and therefore nothing will change. And it's almost like the politicians have to be kept dumb so that civil service and the corporate sector get on with the business of really directing the country. And I mean directing because the Corporation of London, I think, controls or is responsible for something like 35% of the GDP of Britain. That's enormous.
Absolutely.
So if they were to pull the plug on the Corporation of London, if all the banksters in the Corporation of London, in the City of London, were to move their computers to Frankfurt tomorrow, that could mean 30% of our economy collapses. Does that not give a kind of stranglehold and almost like a blackmailing effect on even Whitehall?
Well, it does. But the other angle to look at is that it's not only that the financial services sector, which includes the insurance, banking, and other related industries with the financial services, a huge power. And of course, the other thing is, again, a topic for another discussion, is the way money is generated. As you well know, there's no basis to it. It's just printing. Yeah. And that creates inflation, that creates artificial sort of wealth in reality. And of course, then the stock market itself is a big casino whereby the wealthy can sort of put money in it and have Bitcoin valued at whatever, or some stock valued at $100 a unit. So all these things which happen in the economy are in reality an expression of what's going on with the ruling elite. And the ruling elite, as I pointed out earlier, they go to the same schools, they go to the same universities, they probably eat at the same restaurants, they have membership of the private clubs, exclusive private clubs in London, whereby, after a sort of a day's, I was going to say day's work, day's jollying in the parliament, they go and have dinner and a drink and with caviar. So all these things make it very pervasive. It really is not only is corrupting in the classic sense of not really sort of brown envelopes passing hands, but it's a sort of a wink and a nod sort of approach to it, that, okay, you will be appointed as chairman of the BBC, but on the back of that, you will support the government and you will have documentaries and so on, which sort of portray the elite's positive side of it.
The corporate sector, and maybe some of the politicians, would argue, though, that their economic policies are based on the necessity of having these big businesses driving industry, driving economy. And they've got the trickle-down throwback argument, haven't they? They say, look, everything that they make, all the profit that the multi-billionaires make, actually ends up coming back into the ordinary man's pocket. Is that true?
Well, if trickle-down economics did work, then we wouldn't be where we are in 2025 at this moment, because this approach was adopted, as I said, by Reaganomics, by Professor Friedman of Chicago University, where this concept was presented to American president and then Margaret Thatcher and so on, that the wealthy, if they make money, then it will trickle down to the bottom part of the pyramid. But the reality is that last 45 years of experiment hasn't proven it to be so. So that's a glaring illustration of that. This trickle-down economics is just a fraud, if you like. It's good in the textbooks. It's, you can write your papers and get your PhD on trickle-down economics, but in effect, it doesn't work. What I think is important to remember here, Brother Mohsin, is that Ford, the chap who started Ford Cars, and he had a concept, he had a philosophy. He said, I want to pay my workers the best salary or the best wages that I can. The reason is because if they have more money in their pocket, they'll be able to buy Ford cars and they'll spend it in the economy. So if you squeeze the ordinary worker, they will not have enough income. And what has happened in most of the sort of, British, American, sort of anglicized countries is that 40, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, the salary of a CEO used to be maximum 20 times of the lowest worker.
I see.
Okay. In the Scandinavian countries, it still is the case. In Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland, the chief of the company doesn't earn more than 20 times of the lowest worker. Now, in most of Britain, USA, Australia, Canada, and so on, the chief executives earn 200, 300 times, 400 times, maybe even 1,000 times more than the lowest income earner. So that was in a way of equalizing, if you like, the wealth in the nation. And this is statistics which are available for everyone to see. So we've done something utterly disastrous with the whole sort of politics and economics and the social side of the nations in Anglophile countries, if you like.
I think you've given me a really good account of where a lot of the problems lie. There are two specific examples that I think people will be touched by. One is going to be the immigration one, because the big push is to say immigrants take our jobs. And corporations, I know for a fact, do deals to bring in organized immigration into work in places like Tesco. You can see it. They have special systems of being able to get people in, even when ordinary immigrants can't get through. These are organized batches of immigrants who are imported to do specific jobs, it seems. The London Transport do it. I think they've got people like, of course, these co-ops, these big supermarkets.
Even the NHS, doctors, nurses, and so on.
So that's organized immigration. So it could be controlled. But is it true that immigrants are affecting the British economy and taking the jobs of ordinary people, as Nigel Farage and co seem to be riding on that tidal wave of popularity, that they're going to sort this out or stop immigration, and it's going to be a magic wand for curing the economics of Britain?
Well, there are structural issues to look at, demographic issues to look at, and the aging population in UK and the European Union. One of the challenges that Brexit has presented to UK is that some of the Europeans who were able to have easy access to Britain no longer have that. But of course, on the back of it, there are recruits coming from Philippines, from Nepal, from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, all over the place into UK now. So they've got rid of the so-called white immigrants with blonde and blue eyes to darker immigrants. And some economists at the time of the Brexit debate looked at the figures. They said that when I was talking about demographics and aging population, Britain has an aging population, and so has the whole of Europe. There are 11 million pensioners in UK at this moment. So people over the age of 65, 66, 70, whatever, they are really a drain on the economy.
Well, 25% by 2030 is the figure for people over 65. That's the prediction.
Exactly.
So that's maybe 25-30% of the population.
Exactly. So Britain needs 4 million new immigrants just to keep the economy at an equilibrium level. Okay.
Wow.
Whole of Europe needs 40 million immigrants. You're talking about huge numbers.
Why do they need them?
Because aging population. Because people are not able to work after a certain age.
And won't we be able to supply that workforce?
No, we won't be able to, because if there's working population is reduced, then where do you find? And of course, the if you like, the the birth rate is also declining in the whole of Europe and UK. Britain has actually benefited by immigrants who've come in the last 10, 15, 20 years, that the population is over just about 2.1%. I think 2.1 child being born in the UK, while in most of Europe it's less than 2%. And the economists argue that you've got to have between 2 and 3.
And what kind of jobs would immigrants come and do? Does that impact the relationship between indigenous Britishers and the ones who are coming in? Are they taking the jobs of Britishers, or is it jobs that the Britishers don't want to do?
Well, this is an interesting topic, Brother Mohsin, is not only are there indigenous sort of population, the second and third generation immigrants start viewing the new immigrants as their enemies also. So that's a debate and a discussion.
Freshies, I think the word is. Yeah, that was
exactly,
the last time I picked
exactly. So, those immigrants who arrived here in the last 10, 15 years are not seen very pleasantly by the third generation immigrants also. So they've bought into, if you like, the majoritarian view of that immigrants are taking their job. But as I said in the beginning, is that it's not the immigrants who take the jobs of the indigenous population. It's the people arriving in private jets who take the jobs of the ordinary people.
By not creating the industries that would create jobs?
Exactly, not creating.
Okay, let me maybe enhance that. You can lead me on this. What the impact of artificial intelligence? We've heard now Mr. Trump has had a big engagement with the tech fraternity. Elon Musk has been very, very vociferous on all sorts of fronts, but let's focus on the impact of his kind of industry, the AI. AI invariably, if it's enhanced and pushed out, will wipe out jobs. And AI seems to be the direction that all of these Western nations want to drive. In fact, Donald Trump and co are saying they want massive investment. People like Larry Fink and Bill Gates have been over as well, also pushing these kinds of things. Elon Musk has been attacking the British government, possibly because they aren't taking those kinds of policies as seriously. So there is this question of where will the jobs come from? I mean, immigrants are being blamed, but if even immigrants, I guess, if you had AI and robots and whatnot emerging to do jobs, immigrants' jobs would go, and certainly now with ChatGPT and DeepSeek and whatnot all coming through, the jobs of journalists, the jobs of everybody is on the line. Where are we heading? I mean, in terms of the old school employment and the old school way of running the mechanism, if they keep going the way they're going, is there any room for real employment? Are we all going to end up on universal credit of some kind?
Well, that was the whole strategy of the 2030 agenda, as you know. That's another big topic that one I'm sure you may address at a later date, is that really to have basic wage for everyone and have sort of electronic credits and all these kind of things, so that people feel comfortable and happy that they can, buy their bread, pay for their utilities, pay the rent or the mortgage or what have you, and have perhaps a week in sunny Spain or Turkey or whatever year, and people are comfortable with that kind of thing. So there is that agenda which is not only muted but actually articulated quite often by the Davos elite if you like, or I like
the
to
World
call
Economic
them,
Forum.
I like to call them the Davos devils, if you like, you know.
But the World Economic Forum is the practical rollout program or institution that rolls out the programs which the United Nations, with its Agenda 2030, is driving. So again, my argument at the beginning was that all of this kind of seems to be stitched up. You have these economic institutions on a massive level. You have the corporations and the banks who control the money or whatever. And then you've got these governments and you've got the media guys, all part of that same club. And then we wonder why something like housing, this is the last point I'm going to touch because this is another issue which the ordinary layperson is concerned about. I mean, people can't afford rent. The rents in, say, London, for instance, or many places in Britain are now unaffordable for the average young person, and they're the main ones who are going to get damaged by this. They can't afford a house, they can't afford a mortgage, they can't afford to be able to maybe take up a family because the wage they've got is not going to be able to provide and support. So why would they do it? So we're again atomizing society and forcing them to break from the old systems, which has a psychological effect potentially, a health effect, a mental impact, an impact on the entire way our society is operating. And people like Starmer and Farage and Donald Trump, for that matter, seem to be oblivious. They're not concerned about any of these things. They seem to be operating in a completely alternate reality, and yet the public now is still faced with, I've got to vote Republican or I've got to vote Reform or Labour. They're still being herded into the choices which are arguably all being presented to them by the same people who are causing all of this economic woe. So what's the solution? Well,
solutions are manifold. Obviously, one would say that have a revolution, but that doesn't happen, you know, that quickly.
The last time the English had a revolution, I think probably
1066,
and that was a foreign invasion.
Exactly,
so yeah, that was immigrants taking over the land. Settler colonialists. Yeah.
So I think the struggle is of educating the population on a regular and continuous basis through programs like yours and other alternative media, which is enlightening the public to think differently, to really not accept the narrative. So education is one, which doesn't happen very quickly. It takes time. Secondly, is to empower people into creating a community environment, into sort of supporting each other.
So parallel economics.
Yes, parallel economics, if you like. Not really buying into sort of these sale offers which you may not require. You know, if you've got 3 or 4 suits, why do you need a 5th or a 6th one, if you like? Or if you've got 4 pairs of shoes, why do you need a 5th pair? Or women particularly.
So that's a mindset change. That's a lifestyle and mindset issue. Yeah?
Exactly. Which takes time. As I said, it doesn't happen overnight. Thirdly, of course, organizing, as I said, one, supporting the community, each other. Secondly, sort of having smaller discussion groups, not just media, so that, again, it's part of education, if you like, allowing people to think in a way which is quite different from what they have accepted all their lives. And of course, the other important factor is that concept of God, which has been taken out from the whole discussion. I mean, we've had half an hour, 45 minutes, but we haven't talked about God. And the reality is that, when Blair's Goebbels, I forget his name, who was the sort of PR spokesman for Blair.
Campbell,
yes.
Yeah.
When one of the journalists,
Alistair
Campbell, when one of the journalists asked, what's your view on God? He said, we don't do God. So if a government, leaders, an elite, although Blair claimed to be a Catholic, but when there is no godliness in the whole sort of system, then it's eventually going to fail. It may take a century, 2 centuries, we don't know. But empires have come and gone. Economies have failed. If you look at it, like Ali Shariati quite famously mentioned that the battle has always been between evil and good. Starting from Cain and Abel down to all the prophets. So we are perhaps moving into a different philosophical.
No, but I want to
you
press
know,
this.
And I want to say,
God-led economics is an interesting one. Usually, I mean, the one that I'm familiar with, of course, even Christianity or Islam, certainly,
and Judaism, yes.
absolutely banned usury, and usury is one of the fundamental pillars of making the rich richer and the poor poorer, even in the capitalist society we have. So, are you proposing that we look at things? By raising God, are you talking about reevaluating our economic morals, our morality around economics and politics, and that will have a change in lifestyle?
Not just sort of economics. Economics is just one aspect of one's life, because what economists have often argued, Brother Mohsin, is that someone goes into a supermarket and puts on the calculator that what's my sort of utility benefit of it. But the reality is that 70% of the carers in UK are females who look after their elderly or disabled family members without any pay. So they're doing altruistically, completely. So there's no cost benefit to it, if you like.
The whole charity industry is
the whole charity,
not in the GDP calculations.
Exactly. So when one talks about that, human beings, this is what the economists argue, is that they are, looking out for themselves. But the reality is that people don't do. People do charitable work, people do charitable donations without seeking any reward from it, whether in material sense or non-material sense. Even thank you is sometimes not required when people do charitable work. So we've got to look at that and really tap into that human aspect of compassion and love which we have. Because what economics wants us to do, or the current model of economics wants us to do, is to think of ourselves as myself, me, myself,
greedy.
And I. Greed. Yeah. And Margaret Thatcher famously said, greed is good. So as soon as you have greed, then of course the godly factor comes out of it, that I'm really looking out for myself, my family, and perhaps my friends, if you like, but certainly myself is the most. And that leads to all kinds of illnesses in society, if you like, whether it's LGBT issue, whether it's sexual freedom, whether it's sort of gratification now. It's all related to taking God out of that system, if you like, because it's for my own enjoyment, it's for my own pleasure. Therefore, why should I worry about anyone else? And this is what the current economic model and materialism leads us to in that direction. So it's not just changing the mindset of an individual, it's actually changing the whole culture, whereby one has to start thinking of godliness in our lives.
So generosity and those old prophetic virtues and values, perhaps, is that what you're saying we need to re-inject in order to change the grassroots mindset, which then may lead to an economic sea change or a revolution, as you said?
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a fantastic note to put on, to end it on. It's left me thinking there's another program. What is godly economics? That's almost like an entire program to discuss in itself, because it's certainly not on the radar in Britain as we know it. Thank you very much for joining me, Shabir Rizvi, and I'm sure we'll have you back in to maybe follow up with some of the points which we weren't able to go into in greater depth. But there we have it. Economics, politics, sociology, whether you want to go towards culture, none of it can be compartmentalized, it seems to me. It seems to me that this notion of saying economics can be dealt with without looking at our morality, without looking at the education system, without looking at our entire lifestyle. It's impossible to do that and have an effect on changing things for the better. We look to politicians and economists to essentially make the changes that are required to make us happier, healthier, safer, and more protected. It seems that they are more concerned about serving those who essentially pay their salaries or certainly control the economy. That's an untenable situation in the long run. It puts us on a collision course with the establishment. Many call them the parasite elite. It also means that there will be no resolution to the problems we all know exist. And I believe that ordinary people actually have a better idea of what's economically beneficial for them than politicians do or the economists, simply because there's nothing in it for them not to do the logical, rational, commonsensical thing. Unfortunately, the system, the institutions, whether it's academia, whether it's the political mechanisms or the media mechanisms, they are rooting for a side which is not you, the public. And that's where we need to begin the thinking. It's where we need to begin the conversation about what is the alternative and what kind of reform, revolution, lifestyle change we have to institute in order to fix a broken Britain. Thank you for watching this edition of the Deep Dive Perspective, and do remember to like, share and subscribe to the channel so that we can bring you more programs, even better and even more quantity of programs which give you the reality and the truth of what's going on in your world. Thank you.